We all know that Luffy was inspired by Shanks to become a great pirate, but what if some of the other Red Hat pirates had actually inspired him as well? What if Luffy saw what they did, how they fought, and what they believed in, and really took all of that to heart as well? And most importantly, what if Luffy was strapped with nothing but a gun and a dream? Yeah, we're going there today because you see, Luffy really loves guns in One Piece, and that's pretty clear when you look at his entire moveset. All his attacks are named something like Gum Gum Pistol, Gum Gum Rifle, and Gum Gum Gatling. I mean, seriously, all of his attacks are basically named after guns, and since this is the case, I thought I'd run a little bit wild here to explore what would happen if Luffy used his Second Amendment rights and went full guns blazing in the One Piece world. Let me just say, what I initially thought would be a goofy, fun little video turned into a seriously twisted and absolutely epic drama about trauma, loss, and battling alongside your inner demons. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. The story starts very similar to the actual series. Luffy eats the Gum Gum fruit, Shanks is totally surprised by all of this, and the whole world gets thrown into chaos. But this mountain bandit Higuma threatens to kidnap Luffy and grabs him by the collar. Then in the middle of the town there's a standoff, and it's settled pretty darn quickly. Shanks of course delivers his famous line, "You're putting your life on the line by pointing that thing at me," when a bandit pulls a flintlock to his head, and then bang! Lucky Roo just rushes in and drops one of the mountain bandits right there in chapter 1. Shanks then turns to Luffy and says, "Luffy, what up? I thought your punch was as powerful as a pistol," and this is where we're gonna change everything. Because those words would go on to ring in Luffy's head much deeper than they did in the original story. Shanks mocked him for being weak, for not having a punch as strong as a gun, and Luffy does need to fix that ASAP to get Shanks' approval. So after this, Higuma of course runs away with Luffy, Shanks loses an arm, you kinda know the drill at this point. But something has now changed in Luffy. He just can't shake the words that Shanks said to him. In the back of his mind, the sight of Lucky Roo shooting that bandit, Backman and Usopp pulling out their rifles to protect him, and just how effective and quick it all was, it really sticks with him. Shanks was right. I mean, Luffy's punch wasn't as powerful as a gun. But you know what is as strong as a gun? A gun. After all, it does seem like all of Shanks' commanders pretty much use firearms, and they are all pretty great pirates. So how did Luffy not realize all of that earlier? And so with this in mind, Luffy sneaks a pair of pistols off of Shanks' ship and runs off into the forest. He has now set his mind on becoming the greatest gunman in the West, the East Blue. But he needs a lot of training, and there's only one man for the job. One evening before the red-haired pirates start drinking, Luffy pulls Usopp aside and asks him to help him become a master marksman. Now Usopp at first laughs at this, but sees that Luffy is pretty serious, so Usopp makes Luffy a little bet. If Monkey D. Gunslinger over here can hit 3 different targets with his pistol, then Usopp will agree to train him. He then throws 3 cups at an incredible speed, and to everyone's surprise, Luffy lights them up, hitting all 3 cups with one single shot. Turns out that this kid is a natural with guns in this timeline, and Usopp is stunned. And since he made the bet, he now has to honor it. He tells Shanks to go on ahead to the next island without him, and that he'll stay back for a little while and train Luffy up. And so starts Luffy's big journey to becoming a humanoid typhoon. The Pirate King, but with guns this time. Okay, but you may now have noticed already a key problem here, dear viewer, because guns aren't actually all that powerful in the One Piece world, at least not on their own. When someone has like just pretty decent haki, they can pretty much resist average bullets. So Usopp's first lesson is teaching Luffy the basics of basic haki, and particularly focuses on observation and armaments. And so in just 6 months time, Usopp teaches a very young Luffy the importance of defense, infusing bullets with his own willpower, and how to see at incredible distances. And of course, to literally nobody's surprise, Luffy absolutely rocks at this. It's something that he's just built to do, and honestly, he almost does it a little bit too well. Something seems a little bit off to Usopp, because Luffy isn't behaving like a regular child. Usopp of course knows the heat of battle and can kill people without hesitation. Just look at poor Bartolomeo. But Luffy's just still a child, and so him killing someone shouldn't come that easy. So Usopp gives Luffy a task and has the young man take on a fleet of wild boar that are terrorizing the townspeople. And well, Luffy just takes them all out without even a bit of hesitation, and it's just wrong. This kid, he isn't even fazed by taking an animal's life and just walks away with such an earnest smile and carefree attitude that it's almost a little bit scary. So maybe, just maybe, that moment with the mountain bandits somehow flipped a bit of a switch in Luffy. A switch that says if the gun gets raised, it's over. Which is pretty dark, I will admit, when you really think about it, but it generally lines up pretty nicely with the Red Hair Pirates' whole general vibe that they got going on, I think. I mean, they have absolutely no mercy for people that hurt their family and friends, and it's become very clear at this point in the current story that they will fully on murder people without questions asked. Shanks does it to Kid, Usopp destroys Bardo's crew, and of course their debut fight has the murder like 3 dudes in 5 seconds. And so this is where the story really shifts as Usopp wraps up teaching Luffy, fearing that if he teaches this kid anything else, he will lose too much of his childhood innocence. But it may already be too late for that, as a seed of darkness has been planted in Luffy, and only time will be able to tell if it will bloom into a great dark nightmare, or if his hidden Nika powers, still totally unexplored, will eventually crush that darkness with the light of the sun. Fast forwarding a couple of years later, Luffy now sets out on his journey. After spending many years developing a new gunslinging style in combination with his rubber body, he's a threat unlike anyone on the entire ocean. Using his rubber body, he can stretch his arms around corners with his guns to shoot from surprising angles, and can even use his body as a sort of backboard to bounce bullets into his opponents by shooting them into himself. On top of all that, he can always of course just resort to an old classic and pistol whip his opponents by smacking them in the head with his gun. Although, now that I really think about it, Luffy would probably call it a gum pistol whip. I mean, god, just imagining a rubbery arm whacking me with a gun sound like spooky. Sends shivers down my spine just thinking about that. Especially considering all of these attacks can actually be infused with haki as well. I mean, Luffy is just way more powerful and is following those true shonen protagonist vibes as well, of just straight up being way too broken at the beginning of the series, at least until he makes it to the Grand Line. But anyhow, after sailing the high seas, Luffy runs into some of his good companions. He scares the living daylight out of a young Kobe by trying to show him how to use a gun. He impresses Zoro, the swordsman, by tactically shooting all of his enemies and his love for his guns. And he even lets out a laugh when Luffy turns to Zoro and yells, "I can do that too," and grabs an extra gun with his teeth and starts spinning around shooting marines with his newly developed 3-gun style just for this arc specifically. And come on, you know that Luffy would do something like that. Which just leaves Nami, and well, I mean, she's still Nami, a cutthroat bandit with her eyes on the prize, something that Zoro and Luffy will still help her achieve as well. But as you probably guessed, there's gonna be a big shift in the story when he finally meets Usopp. Something that doesn't change that much at the beginning, I will say, but will eventually lead to a massive ripple effect that completely changes even the entire Marineford War. Now, in case you forgot, Usopp's dream is becoming a brave warrior of the sea in the main series, which is inspired by his dad, Usopp. In fact, that is why Usopp is a sniper, because he took after his dear old daddy. But you see, in this timeline, so did Luffy. Luffy immediately squares up with Usopp, and once Luffy sees Usopp raise a weapon at him, he throws Shanks' sword right back into his face. He says to Usopp, "You're putting your life on the line by pointing that thing at me." And admittedly, I'm gonna say I'm pretty sure that that would absolutely terrify Usopp. He'd definitely piss himself and start crying, and honestly, who could blame him? I would probably do the same. I mean, if Luffy put a gun to my head and threatened me, but luckily for Usopp, Luffy is still Luffy and laughs it off and tells him that he was just kidding. And then after talking, they kind of bond over the Red Hair crew, and I think this would be the start of a really fierce rivalry. Usopp, seeing a strong marksman like Luffy who shares a role model, wouldn't just settle for second place, especially when he finds out that Usopp is the one who trained Luffy into a mighty gunslinger to begin with and abandoned him and his mother instead. So from Usopp's perspective, something must be incredibly special about this Luffy person, and Usopp will find out what it is. Now, of course, he's honestly a little bit annoyed and jealous, but he's still going to respect this man for what it's worth, I guess, and for now, Usopp just knows that he is weaker and worse at using guns, but in his eyes, he just doesn't need guns to begin with. And so he decides that he will prove to his father and his new captain that the slingshot is actually mightier than any firearm, which, I mean, let's be real, it totally isn't. But when Luffy does see this fire in Usopp's eyes, he does decide to totally stoke those flames. Luffy knows in his heart that this long-nosed coward will one day become a great sniper and potentially even the Sniper King, assuming that Usopp stays with the crew, and I sure hope he stays with them later on in this video. So after that beautiful heated interaction, they do go and grab Sanji from the Baratie as well, because even in this timeline, Luffy still loves food, I mean, you know, and he still needs that master chef on his crew, of course. Though this isn't all that occurs here, as a legendary swordsman approaches Luffy asking if he's the infamous Straw Hat shooter that he's heard so much about. This weird-looking, stunning vampire man is none other than Confronting Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman, and Luffy gets all goofy at the thought of someone knowing him for his gun skills. But before Luffy and Mihawk can even start chatting, Zoro leaps in to fight Mihawk, and I mean, you know what happens at this point. Luffy this time around, though, is not as passive. While he does still respect Zoro's one-on-one match, I think, the idea of his crewmate getting stomped out feels like a threat to himself, and since we've now established that he's a little bit more trigger-happy in this branching timeline, Luffy takes a shot at Mihawk in retaliation. And while Hawkeye's, of course, shakes it off like it was literally nothing, he was also still very impressed by Luffy's commitment to his crew. He goes on to make a cheeky comment to Luffy about the importance of putting the weapon down when you're outmatched, and acknowledging that he's quite familiar with Shanks, and after warning Luffy that his next shot would be his last, Mihawk smiles and then walks away. Now, on top of this crazy standoff, Zoro now sees Luffy step up to the strongest swordsman and feels honored, but I'll admit he's probably also pretty embarrassed, right? I mean, no one has ever put their neck out on the line before for Zoro like this, and he promises himself that he will never let that happen again. Nobody will ever have to raise a gun to protect him, especially his captain. So what a beautiful and lead-filled moment. It might just make me cry. All right, quickly, before the guns and swords make me weep here, we do have to bad acting. We do have to flash forward through time a little bit, where Luffy's guns now prove more and more useful, I think, because Luffy has taken his training really to heart and defeated many great pirates. By using his technique Gum Gum Guns Akimbo, Luffy uses his twin pistol style to defeat the legendary clown Buggy. He shatters the roof of Arlong Park and pierces through Arlong with a harpoon gun, because you see, he's a fisherman and you hunt fish with harpoon guns, and I thought it was funny, alright, so like, just let me have that joke. I'm gonna make a bunch of really bad ones in this video. But come to think of it, it's actually after he defeats Arlong that the crew actually realizes something. Nami is struggling, an emotional wreck, and generally just overwhelmed by what just happened. Because Luffy doesn't just defeat Arlong, Arlong is dead. Sanji is conflicted, Usopp's terrified, but Luffy seems pretty fine. And well, Zoro, I mean, he's fine too. He's killed plenty of people, but Luffy is a little bit off because he seems to be feeling good. He's not even faced by all of the violence and murder that he's caused with his guns and just kind of, you know, shrugs it off. After all, they had raised their weapons at him, so they must have been prepared to die, right? That's what he learned. And seeing all this also, of course, leaves Usopp a little bit unsettled as well. I mean, Luffy is usually so kind, caring, and inspirational, but these moments of cutthroat violence from a teenage boy just seem really wrong. So one night, he pulls Luffy aside and asks him why he decided to pick up firearms instead of, let's say, a sword, his fists, or really any other weapon in particular. And in that moment, everything changes for the worse. As Luffy tells Usopp about the time when he realized that guns were just the most effective weapon, Usopp realizes that Luffy is broken on the inside. He's had a very bad traumatic response to watching murder at such a young age and has just somehow tried to normalize it for himself. Usopp questions why his father would even train someone like this, but realizes that he doesn't truly know his father at all, and so maybe that's just kind of the man that he is. Which would be a truly devastating bit of dramatic irony, as we do know that Usopp also feared what Luffy was deep down, but poor Usopp of course doesn't know that his father left Luffy for that very exact reason. Now in our timeline here, because of how efficient Luffy is at gunning his enemies down, he's completely bypassed his interactions with Vivi, Mr. 3, and the giants on Little Garden. When I thought about it, the timing probably just doesn't line up, as they're just moving through islands way quicker than they usually would. Like at this point, the crew has pretty much gone full John Wick and is killing with such incredible efficiency that they're just smooth sailing through this early part of the Grand Line. But don't worry, because they still picked up Chopper along the way, which I guess nice. Now, once Luffy broke through into the Grand Line, he was bound to come face to face with the the dreaded mafioso, Sir Crocodile, and by association, the heartthrob of the One Piece community, Nico Robin. And I hear you questioning at this point, Manu, why would Luffy fight Croc if he hasn't met Vivi? And I'll get to that in just a moment, but before they can have their legendary face-off, Luffy runs into someone else that is very special to him. Because while the crew is walking through the streets, a warm heat fills the air around them. And suddenly Luffy finds himself with a gun pointed to his head, but thanks to his intuition, he quickly draws and pulls his gun on the man behind him as well. And they come to a standoff as Luffy turns around slowly. You're not gonna want to use that one on me, brother. And as Luffy's looking up, he sees a half-naked cowboy, the legendary commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, Fire Fist Ace. Luffy drops his gun and gives his brother a big hug and catches up with him a little bit over what's been going on. Ace tells the crew that he's looking for a pirate named Blackbeard, and the crew tells Ace that they have no clue what a Blackbeard is, and he just shrugs and tells them that something is up in Alabasta and that the princess has been missing as well. He speculates that one of the warlords of the sea is here doing some sneaky stuff, but he can't really pinpoint it, but he also knows that there's a marine that's been snooping around as well and promises to help Luffy take care of anyone that's hunting him down. And so with all of that said and done, the two brothers rekindle their bond in Alabasta. Ace takes a break to literally shoot stuff with his brother, inspiring Luffy with his finger pistols. And really overall, what's more precious than two brothers with guns walking around a country that they've never visited and shooting stuff? Definitely an okay thing to do, and there are no problems with it. This is a heartwarming tale of guns. Alright, but in their little gun journey, Luffy notices the people of this country are struggling, and his earnest and good side does come to light here a little bit. He does wonder if there's anything that he can do to help the people of this country, and during that time, Zoro remembers something as well. He remembers that someone tried to recruit him to work for this weird gang that was, now that I think about it, it was located in Alabasta, but he doesn't remember who that was. Luffy, though, he's a pretty good judge of character, so he does what any sensible guy with a gun does and kicks down the front door of the castle and demands to see the king. After some lengthy discussions, and by that I mean Luffy and the crew knocking out most of the royal guard, Luffy comes face to face with Sir Crocodile and immediately pinpoints the problem right there. This dude, he has a hook for a hand and he pointed it directly at Luffy. Now, Crocodile just meant to do it as a sort of little point forward thing, but in Luffy's eyes, that was a direct challenge. So Luffy just immediately fires on him and Croc dodges it easily with his sand powers. Actually, he doesn't even need to dodge, it's just passive. After that, the two clash for a little bit, bouncing bullets around, clipping each other with shots and slashes, but unfortunately for the Croc, Luffy figured out that he was weak to water, so from his back pocket, he pulls out a Super Soaker. The Gum Gum Water Gun is a fierce move that he developed back in his childhood while playing with his brother Ace, and he was able to use it against Crocodile to hard counter his Sand Logia powers, so get wet, bro. By using his water gun and his Haki-infused bullets, Crocodile never stood a chance against Monkey D. Gunman. And so Luffy leaves Alabasta, and subsequently the entire nation develops a much harsher stance on gun control laws in his absence as well. As you can probably tell, Gundy Shooter over here is a brutal man, but he's at least changing the world for the better. Unfortunately though, his world is going to flip upside down when he makes his way over to the next big arc, Water 7 and Enies Lobby. Because arc after arc after arc, poor Usopp has been getting left in the shadows, and even though he's upgraded his slingshot, he just cannot keep up with Luffy's insanely quick draws. As a matter of fact, when he takes a quick moment to reflect back on their journey, he sees just how left behind he really is. I mean, the whole crew is so inspired by Luffy that they've started to train alongside him and even study his craft. Even Sanji felt so inspired by his captain that he picked up a cool hat and 2 guns of his own just so he could be a little bit more like Luffy. But don't worry, he still can't use his hands with them, so he just taped them to his shoes and fires them whenever he kicks. And since some of you are probably wondering, yes, one of the guns he puts in his shoe is the same random gun that he pulls on Nico Robin after Alabasta as well. Still don't know why he ever had that, but in this timeline, it does work pretty nicely, so we're just gonna include it. Oh, also for all of you deep lore people out there like myself, you might have noticed that I based his new look off of his early concept art design back when his name was actually still Naruto, because originally for Oda, Sanji was supposed to be the sick Western gunslinger, and so I'm bringing back what we lost, you know, because if not now, when then? Then when? That does not translate really well. Anyways, Sanji of course is not the only one who's now got a gun as well. Nami picked up a Tommy gun in Alabasta, and their new recruit, Nico Robin, is strapped with like 30 pistols, one for each hand. Meanwhile, Chopper's got a head-mounted turret that spins around on his silly little hat. And I know what you're all thinking, but don't worry, Zoro still just uses swords because I could just never change that. It's just that now, for whatever reason, he makes his little reload sound with his mouth when he takes him out of the sheath, like kind of like ch-ch. And to keep it real, guys, I did think about letting him get a cool gun sword or use a sword with a bayonet attached like a sword at the top, and while those were fun and thematic ideas, it just felt kind of wrong for Zoro because he is the sword guy and he just needs to keep his katana, and I mean, I don't know, I'm not gonna change that. Anyways, the point here is that it's clear that the Straw Hat shooter Monkey D. Luffy has built himself a crew that now more resembles the average American barbecue, and Usopp is really struggling to feel like he's got a place here. So he leaves, firing an acorn into Luffy's back, a somewhat pathetic sign of betrayal that shows Usopp's goal isn't to harm Luffy, but just to leave him, truly stabbed in the back, or I guess shot in the back. You get the thing. He is leaving and he's really sad is what I'm trying to say. But Usopp is doing it with a purpose, because Usopp thinks that if he finds his dad, maybe he can set Luffy on the right path again. After all, he was his mentor. However, Usopp is going to be in for a rude awakening when he realizes why Yasopp left Luffy in the first place. After that, Enies Lobby goes pretty standard, I'd say, but it's Luffy himself who shoots down the flag, of course, infusing his gun with a flame power inspired by his brother Ace. Now, once again, no one is quite sure how he even does that, but you know, they don't really bat an eye here, and you shouldn't either, dear viewer. Actually, now that I think about it, there is one key difference, because Luffy absolutely washes the floor with Rob Lucci. I mean, Shigan? Finger guns? Dude, Lucci, what are you doing? Why would you stroll up and bring a hand to a gunfight? Stupid. Now, moving on, like pretty much everything on Thriller Bark happens the same way as well, except for one slight change here, because we learned during Kuma's flashback that he did recognize Luffy as Dragon's son and a potential Nika-like figure based on his rubber powers as well. And seeing Luffy stretch his arms around to do his, you know, sick trick shots on Gecko Moria, Kuma makes a dark realization. Because instead of hopefully seeing Luffy as the warrior of liberation, he seems to fear that Luffy is now the sun god. Because the way that he cuts down his enemies is ruthless and doesn't exactly inspire hope and liberation, but instead more so frames Luffy as judge, jury, and executioner. And this sight, a man with Nika's power delivering divine punishment, makes Kuma question his whole path in life. Because is this the god that he's been worshipping? No. Kuma must give this guy a chance. After all, Luffy's father is such a good man, so surely his son will become the sun god. So Kuma lets them go, and as I said previously, nothing else happens. Now, as they land in Sabaody, Luffy hears news of his brother Ace being kidnapped by the world government and his impending execution. And so he tells the crew to gear up and be ready to leave the very next morning, but unfortunately, all isn't gonna go as planned. The Marines are not as loosey-goosey with letting the Straw Hats escape this time, because sure, Kizaru was pretty ruthless the first time around, but obviously he wasn't trying all that hard. Unfortunately, Luffy's power and influence are much more dangerous this time around, and Kizaru will lay down the law. And no, he will not lay law, I mean law will escape as usual, and so will most of the Straw Hats. You see, Kizaru is just way more serious and brought some reinforcements with him to help as well, because he can't just let these stupid pirates throw his world into absolute chaos, especially in the presence of so many celestial dragons. And so on top of Kuma, Doflamingo makes his way to Sabaody as well, as Kizaru promised to let him cut down those loose threats. And so together, Kizaru and Dofi drop some real bodies at Sabaody before Kuma can finally lodge them away. And Luffy screams in agony as he watches Doflamingo slice through Nami, and Kizaru zaps the little reindeer Tony Chopper to dust as well. Unfortunately, even with guns and turrets, these two are by far the weakest members of the crew at this point. With a truly brutal display from the Marines and Warlords, there's just no logical way that they would actually make it out alive here. I mean, the fact that they do during the series is already a testament to real plot armor, but not in my timeline. Not happening. We're being a little bit more realistic here, even if it's really dark. Now, after all of this, Luffy is emotionally crushed and unleashes a flurry of bullets at the Warlords and Kizaru, but is still, of course, nowhere near strong enough, even though he's stronger than in the main timeline. They just laugh at him while Kuma blasts the Straw Hats away. But while he's flying away, in a split second, Luffy takes one final shot, one vengeful bullet that pierces straight through the head of Bartholomew Kuma. It's poetic, truly. The last thing that poor Kuma sees is his god pull the trigger, ending his own life. All that he wanted to do was save him, and as Luffy flies off, Kizaru loses it in a fit of rage because, as he sees it, his friend, his brother, Kuma, had his life taken at the hands of the dreaded Straw Hat Luffy, and somewhere, broken and saddened, Jewelry Bonnie weeps as well. After that, Luffy settles on Amazon Lily and is now really struggling. He's lost his crew and he's now just received word that his brother is scheduled to be executed. Luckily, Dredd looks really good on Luffy and he still manages to swoon Boa Hancock here. He does need to find a way to save Ace, and without a crew, he can only think of one way to do it, and so he asks Boa to take him to find Whitebeard, Ace's captain. The way I see it, there's really no point in Luffy going to Impel Down here because he would just truly die right at the beginning of his break-in, because mentally he may want to go, but I truly don't think it's anywhere near as interesting considering all of his former enemies are now dead. And since Luffy has Haki and is, like, in general just a way stronger fighter at this point, he can realistically actually go directly to Whitebeard and fill the hole left by Ace. Boa at first is a bit reluctant, but then helps Luffy by calling over Silver's Rayleigh. Rayleigh is incredibly close with Boa, saving her as a child, and seeing as he's linked up with Shaki, a former Empress of Amazon Lily, I think it only makes sense that she'd call him for help in this very odd and unique situation. After all, Boa can't just risk her own standing as a warlord by helping Whitebeard, but she can call Rayleigh a fellow old man with nothing to lose. And once the Dark King sees that Straw Hat, he knows exactly who Luffy is and helps him get to Whitebeard. And thank God that he did, because if this random kid just showed up to the Moby Dick, he'd probably get absolutely destroyed, but in the presence of the Dark King Rayleigh, and with that hat on his head, Luffy is in the clear. Whitebeard sees Luffy in his hat and is reminded of his great rival, the Pirate King Goldie Roger. But he also sees that look on Luffy's face, a look of despair, anger, and slight darkness. And in his mind, Whitebeard questions Shanks' choice to give Luffy Roger's Straw Hat, as he lacks his usual wondrous smile. But then Newgate also remembers everything Ace has told him about Luffy and sees Rayleigh with him, and this sort of assures him that Luffy must be a good person. Plus, who is he to judge the look on this young kid's face? I mean, he's literally about to wage war on the entire world government over Ace, so it does make sense that his brother would be really pissed as well. So Whitebeard makes a judgment call here and brings Luffy with him to Marineford, and like any good uncle does, he gives him a bigger gun. A beautiful long-distance rifle like the one that Ben Beckman uses as well. Because that's right, Marineford is about to get absolutely crazy. The plan is pretty simple. Break landfall and let this kid with a gun go absolutely nuts. And nuts he is because Luffy is ruthless at Marineford. Everyone raises weapons at him, and that gives him an excuse to put lead in all of their heads instead. Pop, 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 bang, bang, and 24 Marines already dead in like 3 seconds. I mean, he's stretching his arms, he's curving bullets, and he's pistol whipping everyone inside. Luffy is pretty much an army of one on this battlefield, and I'd hate to see what he could even do if you say give him a pencil. Now, while all of this is happening, the Marines get word that Kaido and the Beast Pirates are approaching as well, which is sort of odd. I mean, normally Shanks should be the one holding them off, right? So what happens? Well, after seeing the news that Ace was kidnapped, Usopp put the pedal to the metal and found his father. He had been searching far and wide, but he somehow actually did it. He found the Red Hair Pirates. By using wanted posters, news reports, and just lying a whole bunch, Usopp actually made his way to a small port that the Red Hair Pirates were stocking up at. Usopp tells them about, what Luffy is like now and how he's absolutely terrified whenever people raise a weapon to him. Shanks is really confused hearing this and turns to Usopp, who has been hiding from his son, and so he finally makes his presence known and explains that he'd been worried that this could actually happen. Luffy just doesn't care about life or death, not when he's being threatened. And so Shanks puts 2 two and two together, realizing that Marineford could crush Luffy and push him over the edge, especially if Ace should die. And so he just dropped everything right away to head there at the cost of letting Kaido also join in on the chaos and making it pretty much a race to Marineford between the Beast Pirates and the Red Hair Pirates. Meanwhile, at Marineford, Garp sees what his grandson has become. He's just ashamed and he can't even look at him. He's not angry. I mean, how could he be? He let this happen to begin with, and honestly, Luffy's way too far gone at this point. He's a man on a mission, and the only thing Garp can do is hold his ground and try and stop Luffy if he makes it up to the top of the execution platform. But before any of that can happen, in a streak of black and red lightning, Shanks appears. He slides in front of Luffy and is carrying something. No, someone. Usopp, the brave warrior of the sea, a man who has put his life on the line to stop his captain's rampage. Luffy, of course, is torn and confused. I mean, Usopp? Shanks? Why are they here? Luffy is now conflicted because he should be excited. I mean, they're definitely going to help free Ace, right? But no, the looks on their faces are stern and disappointing. What happened? Why aren't they happy to see him? What's going on here? This moment is hectic, it's chaotic, and it's really confusing. And unfortunately, on the battlefield, all you need is that brief moment of chaos to turn the tides altogether. The pirates had been making pretty good progress here, but this fatal mistake is about to change everything. Admiral Akainu emerges from the shadows with a fiery look of rage and disgust. He knows who his target is. Monkey D. Luffy, the son of Dragon, the disciple of Shanks, and the dreaded pirate who cuts down everyone in his path. But Akainu isn't alone, as Admiral Kizaru flash steps in as well with sword in hand, ready to cut down Luffy himself, as he will have his revenge for what Luffy has done to Kuma. And two angry, full-powered Marine Admirals are maybe a little bit too much, I'd say, for Shanks to defend against in this moment with Luffy there, because he can't save Luffy, Usopp, and himself while taking out two admirals, so he takes a really big gamble. He's already given an arm for Luffy, so why not his life? Shanks turns to Luffy and smiles, and as magma burns through his chest and a sword of pure light stabs through his heart, he mutters the words, "You are a great pirate, Luffy." Then he falls to the ground, limp and dead. Now Shanks hoped that these words would tip Luffy towards the side of goodness, that somehow, if Luffy heard what he always wanted, he'd have enough happiness inside him to push through this fight, but it was all too little too late. Luffy is crushed, and unfortunately, his actions have had real consequences, and that body count that he's been racking up across the Grand Line has now finally caught up with him. In the distance, Luffy sees Sengoku raise his hand, and the spears drop on Ace's neck. In a brief, fleeting moment, he sees Ace's head roll down the executioner's platform and make its way to the foot of Monkey D. Garp, who at this point is just bawling his eyes out and completely broken. And with that, darkness floods Luffy's vision. His heartbeat ramps up. It's going faster and faster. It's going louder. Suddenly, the world starts rumbling and everyone turns to see what is happening. Kizaru quickly goes in to cut Luffy down, but what's this? The light? It's being caught and it's bending? He looks down to see Luffy consumed by rage and malice with a devilish grin on his face. Akainu is confused, Usopp is terrified, but Kizaru knows what this is. He is looking at no one else than the sun god Nika. But I will say that in this timeline, I think the Sun Devil is far more accurate. In a burst of Conqueror's Haki, the world bends to Luffy's will, and from the darkest depths of his imagination, he leaps up into the sky and pulls out gun after gun after gun from seemingly nowhere. Anything that man can imagine is a possibility in reality, and unfortunately for Marineford and everyone right here, Luffy's dark and twisted imagination is bullet hell. The entire island of Marineford is suddenly covered by Haki-infused bullets from every gun Luffy can possibly imagine. Cannons, rifles, pistols, and Gatlings, all of these and many, many more, Luffy himself appearing to be an angel of death in the sky, blocking out the sun with waves and waves of ammunition. The dust settles and Marineford is a graveyard. Bullet holes and smoke litter the ground. The admirals and strongest pirates fled during the chaos and nothing else remains. Nothing but a broken dream and a tainted sun god. Luffy falls to the ground as the sun sets on this truly tragic and dark day. As you can see, Luffy with guns is a really dark tale of loss, a tragic spiral, and a lot of trauma, and I mean, you know, I wrote it that way, but also it could have gone pretty differently had he chosen a different path. A path of honor, respect, and loyalty. Instead of a gun, he could have just forged ahead with a blade in his hand to conquer the high seas. Because with Mihawk as his master and his brothers at his side, Luffy can actually conquer the world. So find out all about that in my video, what would happen if Luffy had trained with swords early, because it turned out to have a slightly happier ending than this one. Sorry if this was a bit of a bummer, so just watch that if you know, want a bit of a mood lift. Anyways, otherwise, as always, big shout out to my Patreons. If you want some access to exclusive content, art, early chapter reviews, a bunch of other stuff, and support the channel, go join up, check it out, and I will see you in the next one.